Welcome to Illuminati Silver. We tell you the truth about silver. Today is Monday, the 6th of March 2017, and we are publishing the full interview with Greg. For those of you who have listened to episodes 1 to 5, this is that recording in its totality. We thought this may help some people to listen all the way through, even though it is quite a long episode. However, it is more convenient for others as they can find this interview in just one location. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome to Illuminati Silver. We tell you the truth about silver. Today is Friday, the 10th of February 2017. And we are at Greg's home shooting the breeze. Greg, good morning to you.
Hi, welcome.
From our last video with you, we mentioned that you have considerable experience in political, economic and world affairs. What we did not mention was that members of the Inner Sanctum, when it is launched in April, will be able to listen to a number of interviews with you on these and a wider range of topics. We thought it a good idea to shoot the breeze with you as a taster of what our Inner Sanctum members can expect. So let's kick off with some rapid fire questions and answers covering a wide range of topic areas. Greg, the subject on everyone's minds, especially conspiracy theorists. President Trump, was he elected or appointed?
I have a fundamental problem with the concept of conspiracies. I've met many senior people in banking, in politics, in industry and commerce around the world. Very few of them, do I believe, could organise a party in a brewery without the help of their secretaries. I have a fundamental belief that beyond the concept that every aspect of life can be defined as a conspiracy, there is no great overarching conspiracy. That said, anyone who has ever been in a children's playground will appreciate that there is endless conspiracy in life. I believe he was elected. The means by which he was elected, I find somewhat questionable.
Why questionable, Greg?
We struggle with the concept of democracy, and of recent years we have been happy to invade a number of countries and shoot people because they didn't believe in democracy, which I think is morally questionable. However, what exactly is a democracy? Are we talking of the popular vote of the total? Or are we talking of some contrived system which may work for a country, such as electoral colleges? Are we talking of proportional representation? Or are we talking of first past the post? Democracy is a many-flavoured concept.
Yes, but hang fire there, Greg. I'm hopefully sure you're not saying that President Trump's election was illegitimate, because the electoral college system exists. The participants in that system for the election of last year were fully aware of how it worked. So surely it was an equal ground from all sides. So hopefully you're not questioning the legitimacy of it, are you?
I'm not questioning the legitimacy because both sides were in a position to lie through their teeth without anybody stopping them.
Right.
As is all too common a practice when electioneering. On the stump, let's face it, nobody is criminally held to account for any dishonesties they may put forward. Just as the mere act of signing an executive order is not a criminal act if it gets turned down by the judiciary. It is an act which is politically unwise to have carried out without first clearing the issue with the judiciary.
Do you have any particular sort of executive order in mind?
At the moment, let us take the one that is before your courts in America. The appallingly introduced concept of controlling entry to America. By all means control it. You have every right to do that. But don't just dream up a set of terms and leave people crashing to earth who are flying in aeroplanes based on the terms you offered them.
Yes, but surely the defenders of President Trump would say, well, isn't it better he does something rather than nothing? He's identified immigration from certain countries to be a problem. Is it not better that he actually signs a document and engenders some form of action?
It is well established that a person with the surname Dahmer or the surname Bundy has been a mass murderer. Does that mean to say that you automatically ban all people whose surname is Dahmer or Bundy? I think that President Trump was appallingly advised. What he has done is carry out an election undertaking with, or should I say not with, but in a manner that has brought the entire American society into a fractured condition, taking sides against each other. It's a very long time ago that one side beat the other in the Civil War. It is not a good time to continue those rivalries. So it is a difficult world, it's a highly competitive world, and it is a world of great flux at the moment. To introduce an ill-conceived bill or executive order which may have as its grounding very sound principles. Firstly, let us establish those sound principles.
Right. So it's the haste that you're more concerned about rather than perhaps taking a little bit of time to assess exactly with evidence who should be banned, how that ban should take place, and then how can it be put into effect. Is that sort of a fair summary of what you're saying?
Yeah, and basically that is what I'm driving at, because to plunge in boots and all without considering the consequences is crassly amateur.
Okay. Another sort of controversial issue is the relationship initially between, or perceived relationship between President Trump and President Putin of Russia. How do you see those relationships develop, not so much necessarily in the individual personal terms, but nation against nation or nation with nation? How do you see that panning out?
I think if it is left to the knee-jerk reactions that are going on at the moment, I see it panning out catastrophically. I'm hoping that in the very near future, wiser heads will prevail and rather more intellectual approach to the problems rather than the bellicose response, because a bellicose response with Russia really isn't very wise. because they have a very large population, they have a very high level of armament, and they have a singular disregard for the casualty rates of their own people.
But only a few days ago, President Trump was interviewed on Fox News, and he was asked by a friend of his, former friend and existing friend of his, representing Fox News, who said, "Why should we deal with a killer? How can a country deal with a killer?" And President Trump said, "Well, we're not that innocent ourselves." What's your take on that? Because that did upset quite a few commentators who perhaps stated maybe Trump is saying the West is equally as bad as Russia.
I'm pleased to say he's saying America is equally as bad as Russia, because I do not conjoin my country with that statement. Yes, we have, in the very recent past, largely under the influence of America, which I have found dubious, been embroiled in a number of rather foolish forays. For instance, to name but a few, the Arab Spring. It never happened. It was a contrived political event. There is no evidence of
a conspiracy then?
No, not a conspiracy. It was a contrived political event designed for a purpose. The invasion of Libya was crass beyond belief and had nothing to do with the position of Muammar Gaddafi. It had everything to do with the fact that Libya is on the verge, or was on the verge, of introducing the gold dinar.
Right, okay.
The gold dinar had the backing of some of the Gulf states, Libya, Egypt, and other states in the region, and was designed to introduce a standardized currency that would pertain through the Middle East and Africa. And from my side of the pond, I said before it happened that America would not be able to countenance this, as it would be a threat to the stability, such that it is, of the US dollar as a reserve currency of choice in many countries.
So you haven't seen then the invasion of Libya as protecting that currency, because some people would argue that it did. It prevented the gold dinar from being established and therefore allowed America to remain, if you like, the leading economic power of the world.
Yes, but with far more people in that world taking a position where they are looking for ways to move away from America.
Okay, so going back then to Russia and America, how do you see that playing out?
I fear that the relationship will set out to be far closer from the side of America than Russia is ever likely to permit it to be. This will leave America very exposed. Let's look at a specific that also brings in actual facts pertaining to the position of Russia and the inevitability of some of its choices.
Okay.
The Ukraine has been courted by America and very foolishly by the European Union.
Yes.
We can come back on just how foolish and why the European Union went down this road at a later stage.
Right.
The Ukraine was destabilized. as far as Russia was concerned. This left them in a position where their relationship with Russia became very strained.
Mm-hmm.
Nikita Khrushchev ceded the Crimea to the Ukraine at a time when the Ukraine was effectively wholly owned by Russia, but an integral region of the United Soviet Socialist Republic, the old USSR.
Mm-hmm.
Now that the Ukraine was veering towards the West, whether wisely or foolishly is a matter for discussion, this left Crimea in the Ukraine camp.
Mm-hmm.
Firstly, that cannot be countenanced by Russia,
Mm-hmm.
because Crimea is the main port and the only hot water port that Russia holds. All others are into the Arctic Sea.
Right.
It is also a major depot for their navy. It is also, and it is an important consideration in a reward-based society, it is one of the great venues for people in the inner circuit
Mm-hmm.
for holiday resorts. Many of them have dashas on the Crimean coast. There was no way that Russia was going to see the Crimea move away from being under Russian control.
So what you seem to be saying is that Russia was right, really, to go back into Crimea and defend it against the Ukraine.
I'm not saying it's right
Mm-hmm.
or it's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm very strongly stressing
Yes.
is it was absolutely inevitable.
Right, right.
You've used that word right again.
Inevitable.
And let us move a little away from Crimea, because I think that is unarguable
Okay.
as a point of view. Not so much a point of view, a point of actual fact.
Mm-hmm.
The other big problem that occurs with contention over Ukraine,
Yes.
many people do not seem to understand that during the days of communism in the United Soviet Socialist Republic,
Mm-hmm.
there was no religion. Gods were not considered in the communist ideology, be they modern concepts of gods or the age-old concepts of the superstitions of the Bronze Age.
But some people will say, well, there were churches. So...
There were churches, but
Mm-hmm.
they were very much controlled,
Mm-hmm.
and they were very much outside, or should I say, beyond the pale, if you expected to get anywhere in the Soviet system.
Right.
What people have overlooked is after perestroika,
Mm-hmm.
subsequent to the opening up of Russia by probably one of your most successful presidents, who negotiated with Mikhail Gorbachev and brought down the barriers with Russia in a manner that no modern politician stands much chance of doing again.
But this is the crux of the matter. Ronald Reagan, it is argued, but argued strongly, basically, with Gorbachev, destroyed the USSR.
I would contend that's only part of the truth.
Right. Now, however,
let me-
Putin wants to rebuild that. He wants to go back to that historical moment as if it never happened. And surely there is a strong, at least academic, if not practical argument that says the last thing the people of the United States should do is form a bond with Putin whose sole aim is to regain the glory of that great USSR empire.
I think that's in many ways a very valid point, but to cover perestroika, secondly, and to complete the argument on the Ukraine, firstly, what people have overlooked is that with the fall of old-style communism,
Yes.
that appeared on the surface with Gorbachev, Putin's later behavior notwithstanding, there was a burgeoning of religions across Russia, the whole of the old Soviet. Islam is stronger in the stans, Turkmenistan, etc. Those countries that are across the Taklamakan Desert from Iraq and Iran. Christianity, in its various forms, also burgeoned. And primacy in the field of Christianity fell to the Russian Orthodox Church. Just as politicians can preach and prattle all they like in a Muslim country, but if the mullahs at Friday prayer tell everyone to ignore their words and do something completely different, the politicians are without a voice. Therefore, Mr. Putin must maintain control of the Ukraine, because thereby he controls the Russian Orthodox Church, the head office, centre, whatever you want to call it, being in Kiev.
Right.
If he loses control of Kiev, he loses control of the Russian Orthodox Church.
And he really sees that as such a great threat.
I believe it is a great threat because people's belief in gods has lasted over 70 years since the communist revolution made them effectively illegal.
So coming back then to this potential special relationship between America and Russia, if I've sort of read your comments correctly or interpreted them correctly, what you're saying is that America could quite naively go into such a relationship with good intent, but actually will be deceived and conned, for the better expression, by Putin, as some would argue he has successfully done with Obama and with George Bush before him, both of whom thought that they could deal with Russia. Are you basically saying you cannot deal with Russia?
I don't think you can deal in the terms that America deals recently with Russia. I think they judge Russia by American standards. And the values in Russia and its leadership bear no resemblance to the standards required in a democratic America.
So should sanctions be withdrawn and trade develop, or should they be kept in place, if not enhanced even further?
I believe sanctions should remain in place until the reasons for those sanctions ends. Otherwise, what is the point in threatening anyone with sanctions if you don't carry it out?
But you've already admitted that there is no way Putin is going to come out of that intrinsically important strategic part of the Ukraine. Therefore, sanctions are there to stay forever.
No, sanctions don't have to be there to stay and can be eradicated fairly quickly. But I question whether the present authorities in the US are capable of it. The problem being that they lack diplomatic training, and one of the big problems America has had for at least since the Second World War is an inability to judge countries outside of measuring them against America. America has always had an introspective appearance to its diplomatic service. Its diplomatic service tends to be people appointed to it, not people who have worked up through it and learnt it.
So in one respect, you're saying the typical sort of British model of the civil service, where people spend years honing their skills, developing those skills, is probably the better method rather than perhaps appointees that tend to be the case in the United States. Because we have witnessed whenever you change a presidency, you basically change all of the civil servants, certainly at the White House, that support that president. Is this where you're going with this argument?
I think that there is a tendency in America to have professional politicians and amateur diplomats,
Right.
when in reality amateur politicians
Yes.
and professional diplomats
Yes.
serve a country better. You mentioned the British model of civil servants. You mention it at a very strange time if you stop and think about it. Never in our history in the last 300-400 years has Britain been so bereft of professional civil servants. The reason being that we have very, very foolishly, and it is something I cautioned against back in the 60s, we have permitted the énarques of France, those who went to the École Nationale, known as énarques, to become the civil service of the European Union. Anyone wishing to have a civil service career of any level for the last 40-odd years has sought his career in the European Union. Net result, now that we are, in my opinion, and I stress it is only my opinion and only the opinion of the majority of people in Britain, there is a vociferous minority, we are doing the right thing in leaving the European Union, but it will give us difficulties in the fields of diplomacy for several years to come as we train the diplomats we let leave to join the European system.
Well, that, Greg, brings us very nicely onto the issue of Brexit. Now, the political aspect of this aside, do you think Brexit will be good economically for Britain? Because we hear the governor of the Bank of England and we hear the IMF and we hear the World Bank saying that Britain's growth has been and will be adversely affected because of Brexit. What's your opinion?
Well, firstly, I question whether the governor of the Bank of England has Britain's best interests at heart when you think that there is every possibility that at the end of his term he will be returning to Canada and making a ploy of his own to run Canada. Therefore, he will be trying to make friends with as many countries in Europe as he can with a view to Canada's long-term relationship with the countries of Europe. Mm-hmm. Secondly, you mentioned the IMF. Mm-hmm. The IMF's present boss has recently been found guilty of fraud running to millions. And the previous boss was found guilty of sexually abusing hotel staff. So I see that neither of them as great examples to be quoted. Mm-hmm. But to treat your question in the manner which I believe you meant it, mm-hmm. Is it good for the country on purely economic grounds? I believe that Brexit was a great folly on economic grounds that was entered into at a moment of extreme weakness under poor leadership which actually admitted that they lied to the British public, and Ted Heath actually stated he had deliberately and wittingly lied to the British public, mm-hmm. because had they known the truth, they would not have voted in favour of remaining in the European Union. The reason that these pusillanimous politicians of the time wanted to join the European Union was twofold. One, it meant they could abrogate on their responsibility of what was needed at the time, which was to pull Britain around from a period of over-union interference, strikes, and discontent, where a strong leader, similar, whether you loved her or hated her, to Margaret Thatcher, would have been able to make that change of the views and behaviour that Ted Heath quite clearly couldn't. And at that stage, Harold Wilson was already suffering from early onset Alzheimer's. And the next leader was Callaghan, who was very busy enriching himself at the expense of his office, something I fear for America at the moment. Mm-hmm. Therefore, having accepted that we were dishonestly taken into the European Union, very much as a milch cow, where we seem to have paid for an awful lot of things and gained singularly little from our membership, I believe that in the very short term, it will have very little effect leaving. In the slightly longer term, it's going to be a difficult period for Britain while we finalise relationships with the European Union, who will do almost everything in their power to make it difficult for us, for two reasons. One, fundamentally, they have never forgiven Britain for our part in saving Europe from being overrun by Nazi Germany. And secondly, because we have always had contacts around the world. This, of course, has not made us very popular with some leaders in America. And I well remember when I lived in the Middle East in the 50s, America was doing almost anything to destabilise the oil at the time, which was controlled in the main by Britain. The raison d'etre behind that was they felt that they had been involved in a great European war, at the end of which Britain still had an empire, whereas America had gained no territory. So clearly, in my opinion, Brexit will not be damaging in the very short term, because there will be a great deal of excitement and exuberance that will carry us through that once it starts really happening, it will be damaging, and it will be a very difficult period as we adjust at the latter end of negotiations and when we first come out, which could be harmful to our economy. We could have a period where we have to tighten our belts, but it will be a period that we can overcome. And in the long term, I have absolutely no doubt that leaving the European Union is the right thing to do in economic terms, in commercial terms, in political terms, and in terms of peace on this planet. That is probably the most important consideration of all.
Well, you mentioned peace, but some people claim that it was the existence of the EU infrastructure that has maintained the peace since the Second World War.
This has been a very popular lie put forward in Europe. It is utter bunkum. There isn't one whit of documentary proof of it, and there isn't a single example where Europe has kept the peace anywhere. And its behaviour in the former Yugoslavia shows beyond doubt that peace was not its aim or its achievement. Peace in Europe has not been kept by the European Union because the European Union has had no coherent force with which to keep peace. Although now it is striving to set up a European army, it hasn't had a European army. It's been utterly dependent on NATO. And NATO has basically comprised Britain first, of course, because I'm British. But the power behind NATO has been
United States.
The United States,
Yeah.
without a doubt. And it has been the United States, with, of course, Britain's guidance, that has maintained the peace.
But of course, President Trump has already said that he expects NATO members to pay their fair share, which he claims they haven't been doing so far. So do you actually see NATO changing in any great way, or members actually stumping up with the cash to pay for their fair share? And what will this actually do for American-EU relations, in your opinion?
It will be an unpopular view. However, Britain has endeavoured to pay its NATO dues and has stumped up the money even when it could least afford it. Mm-hmm. America has paid, just as America has all but funded the United Nations. Mm. Let's look at Germany. What has their contribution been to NATO? Well, the sum total of not a lot. And would you realistically expect the French to honour a commitment? Spain hasn't really participated at all. Italy, I don't think they've had much of a part in it. A few aeroplanes. Holland has made some efforts. But when it comes to peace, peace as prescribed by the Western world has been the United States of America, Britain, Canada, and some allies. One must not at this stage discount Turkey. Turkey has provided considerable air bases and considerable support up until its dalliance with Russia under Putin, where it can't really make up its mind whether Putin is their best friend or whether they ought to shoot their aeroplanes down. They are in a little bit of the muddle. Mm-hmm. But then again, the muddle being created in Syria, right on their border, is some justification for the extremist concerns that are going on in Turkey at the moment. As to the long-term relationship between America and the European Union, I personally don't think it's going to be good, because the French have all too often been willing to try and sabotage allies for the benefit of France. Germany has never really seemed to understand what an ally is. Italy, Spain and Greece can't afford allies, they haven't got any money. So I do think that the situation is going to prove difficult, and as the Chinese so wisely say, may you live in interesting times. It is one of their most normal curses.
Well, it's funny you mentioned China, because that's the next subject area I would like us to continue this conversation with. So let's discuss China. Is it going to be the number one superpower in the world, both economically and potentially militarily? How do you think the Trump presidency's courtship of Taiwan is going to affect China, because there have been some threats there? And thirdly, can the Western world survive with an embargo on Chinese products, or some form of tariff placed on them, which President Trump has threatened? Three interesting areas for you.
So I'll start with the fourth. Just to confuse the issue, I think that the biggest single problem that the United States will find with China is a singular lack of ability to empathize with either their requirements, their honor code, their modus operandi, or their aims. America, like most Western world countries, tends to have economic plans that stretch way into the middle of next week, whereas China tends to have economic plans that are looking at the next 100 years.
Right.
Also, I don't believe, with the poverty so heavily concealed in America, there is any understanding of the sub-economic living standards of the vast majority of the Chinese peoples. America cannot come to terms with its own poverty. Therefore, I think it will have difficulty understanding poverty that means people kill babies because they just plain can't afford them. You are looking at a very, very different culture. It is likening what America would claim was its concepts of honor with Japan's concepts of Bushido. And China has, since the beginning of time, looked on the Japanese people and called them the offshore monkeys.
Right. But coming back, despite that poverty, there is no doubt that China, at the moment, is the second largest economy in the world. It is, apart from India, it is probably going to have the largest growth rate this year. Some forecasting between 6 and 7, or maybe slightly more in some cases, %. So, is it going to be our masters in the future, do you think? Our economic masters?
It's going to eventually be a Sino world. And I don't think there's much doubt of that.
What does that mean exactly?
Look around any big city and there is a very large hidden Chinese population.
Mm-hmm.
That's point one. Point two, they do not have the concepts that we have of looking after each other. They have an ancestor cult, mm-hmm. where ancestors are more important than it would seem than descendants. And to try to compare Britain, America, Canada, or what we see as the civilized world with the Eastern world is utterly specious.
Nevertheless, China is one of the largest importers of gold, as well as one of the larger, not the largest, but larger miners of gold. Now, many of our listeners frequently ask the question, and as do we, of all the economists that we consult with, is China, through its economic prowess, going to dominate the economic infrastructure of the world and potentially convert what is currently fiat currency into some form of gold-backed currency system? And if it does, what does that actually mean for the everyday man and woman in the street, as it were?
We have not so long in the past witnessed the abject fear of the American and Western world's reaction to the possibility of a gold-based currency being launched by Muammar Gaddafi.
Right. Yes.
That is as nothing to the potential China offers. China already has strong relationships with a number of countries that we classify as allies. It has strong relationships with Britain, is about to build a massive power station in Britain, has huge investments. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It has huge investments in various European projects, way beyond the investments that America has contemplated. And something that is conveniently overlooked is the massive amount of investment China has in the United States of America already.
Indeed, indeed. So are you saying perhaps then that China may actually succeed in converting into a gold-backed currency system, and that America or the West will not be able to do to China what it has succeeded to do with Libya?
I don't think there is a prayer of doing to China what we did to Libya. Mm-hmm. We would destroy ourselves in so doing it.
Right. So you could potentially then see one day a gold-back or precious metal-back system of currency?
I think that there is every possibility. Mm-hmm. However, I don't believe there is the probability. The holdings will be held in massive quantities by China, mm-hmm. but it will not, I believe, bother converting to gold backing. At the moment, its currency is backed by the might of China.
Greg, let me give you a hypothesis or an interesting scenario. One of the criticisms, and also at the same time one of the advantages of having a gold-backed currency, is that you can really only expand that currency at the rate at which the gold is dug out of the soil. So basically, you can have a 2, 3 or 4% increase in the amount of currency available if it is backed 100%
May I interrupt?
by gold.
May I interrupt?
Yes.
I don't think that is true. I think that is conventional wisdom.
Go on.
One of the aspects of setting the price of gold is the speed at which it's dug out of the soil.
Mm-hmm.
No one ever talks of the speed at which it gets buried in a bank vault. And if you, as a currency concept, decide to buy massive quantities of gold,
Yes.
as China has done,
Yes.
and you bury it in your bank vaults,
Mm-hmm.
that starves the world market of gold,
Right.
thereby pushing the price up,
Mm-hmm.
which means that the gold in the Chinese bank vault
Mm-hmm.
constantly rises, potentially exponentially, in a manner in which it can buy the rest.
Until, of course, it then releases that gold onto the market, and normal supply and demand economics then says there will be a glut and the gold price will go back down.
We're talking of a country here that has taken a long-term overview.
Right.
Don't forget that when Mao Zedong conquered China in the revolution, Chiang Kai-shek took off with some speed, but not just with some speed, with great alacrity, with China's piggy bank under his arm, and went to Taiwan
Yes.
with effectively China's equivalent of the Federal Reserve and Fort Knox.
Right.
Mao Zedong was about to follow him to take it back, but Chiang Kai-shek was one step ahead of that game, and he invested that money, I believe, through Barclays, DCO and Chase, mostly in the American economy, where it became known as the Wanta money. Now, I shall leave you to research that.
Right.
And that money was put on long-term deposit in America. And I understand that there has been a slight snafu with this, because the money fell due, but it was found that certain individuals in the banking world had had their fist in the cookie jar.
I see.
And there is a shortfall, and America can't actually pay it back, which I believe has some bearing on the amount of bonds China is able to buy from America. It is also interesting to note that China not only has the largest container ship in the world, which sails across to West Coast America, dumps all its goods and goes home empty, there to fill up again with Chinese goods that are steadily improving in quality. But there is also the interesting fact that China would appear to control the Panama Canal, and has widened the Panama Canal so that it can push a similar boat through to deliver to the east coast of America on a regular basis and on towards Europe. Do you see the Western world making such long-term plans?
No. Generally, you know, as well as we do, if you look at companies, generally they're looking at 1, 3, 5, maybe, certainly perhaps chemical companies will look 10 to 20 years ahead. But that's essentially the maximum.
I think probably the pharmaceutical companies are the ones looking
Yes.
the furthest ahead these days, because even if we look at people like Schlumberger, who
Yes.
do most of the international prospecting for new oil and geological work, and do it for corporations like Exxon, BP, Shell, etc., there is a great deal of doubt about the future of oil. Not that we will run out of it, because I personally don't believe we'll ever run out of oil. I am of the opinion that it is more or less fully regenerable, and there's hardly anywhere on the planet, it seems, that if you don't drill a hole to the right depth, you won't fail to find oil.
Right.
We also have the massive deposits that are believed to exist under Gull Island, off of the coast of Alaska, where it has been claimed that drilling in one direction, they hit a reserve that exceeded the original oil fields of Saudi, so they drilled in the other direction and found another one.
So on that basis, then, why is oil going up? Because if that is the case, then we should be seeing $10 oil and not $40, $50, $60 oil, shouldn't we?
I think part of the reason is that within a foreseeable, almost, period of time, you won't be able to give oil away.
So you're not an advocate for investing in oil, then?
I wouldn't suggest anyone invested in oil.
Interesting.
Because at any moment, the new technology in batteries and solar power, we already have hard to trace rumours of the energy source Psi, but those rumours are very well established. We hear that some of the prominent investors in oil, including Saudi Arabia, are investing heavily out of oil.
Understand.
And I don't know who may have come across Psi. I don't understand it myself. I'm not a scientist. However, I understand it in its crudest form is a matter of taking silicon, sand, and superheating it and blasting it with argon to produce effectively 2-inch square bars of specialist glass, and then welding on an alloy of aluminium of some sort onto one end of the bar, cutting a sliver off the bar little more than microns thick, to produce a 2-inch square solar panel that you can plug straight into AC, that is somewhere in the region of 1,000 times more efficient than the current solar panels available. So there is the possibility that some see as probability, but I'm sorry, I'm not well enough to have informed to advise on this, that with the new batteries that will be coming when you buy a new car, you will have 2 of these little cells in the roof of your car, and you will never have to put fuel in that car again.
Well, you mentioned solar panels. Now, one of the great excitements that silver bugs, which we include ourselves in this, to be frank, people who believe that long-term silver has a very, very attractive future. We believe that solar panels is going to be one of the major ways in which demand for silver is going to increase and thereby cause its prices to rise.
Well, you also have to take into consideration there, if you're talking about silver, the entertainment world, where, because they seem to have run out of plots of any description, are now endlessly making werewolf movies. And many a silver bullet will be needed.
Well, The last time I looked, it was zombies, but I take your point fully there. I take your point.
Well, personally, I don't look often. You're going to have to stay away from your mirror.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, are you suggesting perhaps that something like Psi or its equivalent could actually prevent silver for being the panacea for the new industrial age, if you like? Because it's also used in medicines, remember, and in other forms of processes, which in the past has been recognised, but not perhaps developed sufficiently.
You're asking me to play with crystal ball here. My grandparents, who were born in the Victorian era, yes, I am that old, and you can take that smirk off your face. They were born into homes where the only lighting was paraffin. Many people in the Midwest of America, right the way through into the 30s, although oil had been found, were only able to light their soddies with paraffin. Now, the portable telephone device that you are using to record this contains more computing power than was available to NASA when they landed man on the moon. Indeed. Or in District 5, I'm not sure which, to pander to the conspiracy theorists. Right. But to predict what is coming is foolish in the extreme when we're talking of this sort of thing. Yes, I can see a complete wipeout of the technologies that we consider so ultimately fantastic.
Right. By
the simple development of one small change. For example, if what I have read on Psi is correct, and batteries progress at the same speed, it will so dramatically alter the way of life on this planet as to destabilize almost all forms of investment other than a bow and arrow.
Okay, Greg, I'm not sure if bows and arrows are the future, although I am aware of some very wealthy timber merchants. But that aside, let's look. I want to go back to this industrial use of silver, because we hear about its need again being in solar panels and so on, simply because of its conductive properties and the efficiency of that conductivity. And that is why I'm now sort of hesitating, because you are coming out with perhaps, shall we say, alternatives, or maybe something that will completely revolutionize the need for that conductivity. So just so for the benefit of our listeners, just elaborate a little further of where you see this developing. Silver, industrial usage, is it going to increase? If so, for how long and to what extent could that happen? And I'm asking you that without the benefit of a crystal ball, but perhaps to some extent basing it on a degree of logic and your experience in this arena.
My experience in this arena is quite interesting. It comprises two major factors. One, fairly extensive travel in Africa. And two, where I live in Britain, as a measure against that. Firstly, where I live in Britain, my local telephone system astonishingly, is run not on copper, but on aluminium. So archaic as to be utterly ridiculous. And I and my neighbours have been in endless argument with the suppliers of telephone cabling that the rest of the world has moved into fibre optics and we are still all but in the bloody Stone Age. And all too often my broadband collapses, my telephone doesn't work because the aluminium cable has oxidized and has snapped.
Right.
That moves us on to copper. My experience wandering around places like Kitwe and Zambia, great producers of copper. Well, no, they're running out. Copper is the electricity carrier of choice globally.
That's because of the price, though, isn't it? Because it is a lot cheaper than silver. Let's be quite candid
Correct.
about this. Yes.
It is also a very good conductor. It's
Yes.
also very workable. However, there is only one known deposit of untapped copper on the planet now.
And where's that?
And all of the others are running out. And sitting grinning over the Taklamakan Desert at the misfortunes of the Western world, Russia firstly, and then the Western world in Afghanistan, are the Chinese. Because that copper deposit is in northern Afghanistan, on the edge of a massive oil field, an oil field that was believed to be the reason why many of the ridges in the Tora Tora Mountains were bombed flat, as people speculated that the plan was to put a pipeline in. Russia, on the other hand, had been interested in Afghanistan for entirely different reasons. Namely, they wanted a hot port, and they wished to cross Afghanistan and go into South Waziristan and have a port at the northern Indian Ocean. I believe that if China doesn't strike rapidly for that copper deposit, because you can produce as much electricity as you like, but if you can't move it from one place to another, it is impossible to sell in boxes. And I believe that there could be a period of surge that will come very unexpectedly with silver. However, I revert to my comments earlier about Psi. I believe that it will only be a surge for a period.
So you're saying, basically, silver will have its day, but it may not last for long.
Unless it can be adapted into the
Something
new
else.
technology with Psi.
Aha.
Now, I'm completely unaware of what's
that
happening there, because this is so cutting edge.
Indeed.
That unfortunately I don't have the resource, or, to be honest, the intellect or energy to do that research. And I think at the moment the many patents on these ideas that have come from Nikolai Tesla a century ago are being very closely guarded, though I understand that there were 700 new patents lodged worldwide in the last 12 months.
700?
700 allied patents.
Well, that's most interesting, if only for us to try and calculate if we are going to continue to buy silver because we believe it is a good investment long term, to try and calculate that if Psi is likely to a large extent make it redundant or alternatively require it for its development, how long do you think it will be before Psi is actually used?
Firstly, I don't know if silver might be the vehicle for Psi, which could give it a very long-term future.
Indeed.
I also don't know whether Psi will come in last month
Interesting.
or in 5 years' time. However, one thing you can be sure of, however fast it is produced, bearing in mind how small it is, it will take a very long time in those terms to have taken over as the technology.
Right.
Because the day Psi becomes readily available, together with the required batteries,
Yes.
cost effectively, will not see everybody on the planet throw their car away.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So there will be a fairly long period of change.
And surely the oil companies will rally against this in any case because they want to protect their own industry.
The oil companies are, the big boys in oil are
Yes.
already investing in other areas of energy.
Okay.
Now, I don't know who owns the majority of those patents and who is doing the development. Could it be the oil companies? This is going to be a technology that it will be impossible to stifle. Yes, we all know that the oil companies, aka the producers of engines and automotive, etc., are reputed to have stifled all sorts of developments that could have made cars cheaper to run. I think here again we wander into a conspiracy theory on the basis that one of those companies was big enough to be able to put a car on the market with the relevant patents that would run on a pint of oil, petrol,
Or gas.
or whatever,
Yes.
being adequate to drive a car 200 miles, because it would have smashed the competition out. Nobody was going to forego that opportunity had they the money to develop it. So I incline to think that many of these rumours are untrue. The same type of rumours were created about the light bulb. We've heard them about many forms of simple technologies we now accept, only being there because somebody had prevented another technology coming along. I'm sorry, I don't buy into that. There are always innovators.
That is true. And earlier in our discussion, we mentioned maybe China converting gold into a gold currency of some sort, and if not China, then maybe the Western world may have to do that once, as it's perceived, the dollar collapses and fiat currency becomes worthless. Now, well, that was going to be my question. You have frequently used the term "if," as if to suggest that fiat currencies may never run out, but yet mathematically, how can they keep going?
Basically, they will keep going in that they've already run out and we're still using them. So it will be a matter of expediency, whether it is expedient for the big boy on the block to keep them going, or not is a moot point. We won't know the answer to that until it comes.
But that's the issue, though, Greg. I mean, you've got the American debt clock ticking. Every second it's adding millions and millions of dollars worth of debt. We're at or around $20 trillion at the moment. What can that figure go to before people lose total confidence in the dollar? 24 trillion? 28 trillion? 30 trillion?
100 trillion,
100
as long
trillion.
as somebody keeps on printing the money.
But traditional...
It is only a fiat currency.
Yes.
It has no value.
But economists...
The US government won't even announce what percentage of the dollars in circulation they believe to be forgeries, because it doesn't really matter.
But there comes a time, surely, and this is what many of our subscribers argue, and frankly, many of the pumpers argue, the ones who are pumping gold and silver, mainly because they're in that business, but they do make one valid point. Ultimately, all fiat currencies fail, and that is true. If you go throughout history, fiat currencies have failed. What's the solution then? A new fiat currency?
What is the value of gold? It's only got a value for as long as people value it.
Now, we have argued that, but people have valued it not only for decades or centuries, but millennia. And we have difficulty arguing that it won't continue to be valued for millennia, unless you know otherwise.
It is only valued because it is expedient so to do. Much the same as fiat currencies.
No, gold is you have a rarity in gold. There is only so much of that.
Try selling a gold sovereign,
yes,
with a woman's head on it,
yes,
in India. They're almost unsaleable.
They'd melt them down, wouldn't they?
Yes.
And then convert them into bars or something,
yes,
or jewellery or something.
Yes.
Yes.
Whereas with a man's head on,
yes,
the chauvinism of their society,
right,
is such that that's the only ones of value.
Many believe the banking system is on the edge of collapse. The amount of derivatives in existence far surpasses the total net worth of the entire global economy.
One of the most valuable banks on this planet nowadays,
yes,
it may surprise you, is Air Miles.
Explain,
they have a greater
that
capital value in Air Miles issued than there is for many national currencies.
Right.
And it will continue until it doesn't continue. And that might have been last week, but nobody told us yet, because the shysters in the banks are all converting their money into lead models or
gold.
Or
gold
presidents
bars.
converting them into Serbian models. Who knows?
Clearly, I mean, most economists will admit that the 2008 crash was really the defining moment upon which it became known for sure amongst that community that the world was operating with a flawed economic model.
Which idiot didn't know it before?
Oh, I think there were many idiots that didn't know it before. But certainly 2008 was the...
Yes,
was
but it is absolutely essential for a banking system to work.
Yes.
For the system itself and its clients to be totally, voluntarily crano-retentive.
Right. Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
It is only a matter of faith.
That's right.
For as long as you can take your dollar, your pound, your peso, or whatever, and you can go out and buy a dollar, a pound, a peso, or whatever's worth of goods.
Yes, indeed.
That currency is valid.
So when will that faith subside? Because that is the question. That is the question everyone is asking.
Everybody has asked that since there were the lovely apocryphal story of Christ and the moneylenders.
Okay.
I really don't buy into this imminent collapse. I believe the collapse has occurred, but nobody dares do anything because what do you do then?
Absolutely.
We will continue as we are manufacturing the value of money. In 1908, the Pension Act in Britain granted a pension of between 4 and 6pence and 4 and 9pence to every man over the age of 70. Astonishingly, based on inflation, that amount of 4 and 6pence or 4 and 9pence is almost exactly the same amount in purchasing power as the current old age pension.
Right.
And part of the reason why Britain is, like every other country, but in Britain's case, technically bankrupt, with debts that there isn't a prayer of ever wiping out.
Absolutely.
Just the same as every other country. Part of the reason for that is that, firstly, only people over 70 got that. Men over 70 got that pension.
Yes.
We discovered there was a second gender that had been hidden away from the fiscal system, and we granted women a pension, thereby doubling the number of people. Rather bizarrely, we said that men could retire at 65 and women at 60, which further increased it, particularly as women have a longer life expectancy.
Indeed.
So actually, that was the wrong way round.
Yes, we made the situation worse.
Yes. Then, on top of that, in 1908, the average age of Caucasian indigenous British morbidity was 46. So not very many people lived to claim their pension. Now it's 82.
Yes.
And there isn't a hope of being able to finance that pension.
So how's it going to be done?
By printing more money, like they always do.
But we know that the value of money over time depreciates. So a dollar or a pound 100 years ago will buy you 1 cent or 1 penny today, or 2. We won't argue of the exact mathematics of it. Yeah. But you've had a 95 to 98% depreciation.
Give people more dollars. It's not backed by gold. It's not backed by anything. So just print some more.
So this is the key question for you then. If that is the case, and what you have argued is what we have said, why are central banks buying gold then, Greg? Why are they buying gold?
Central banks are buying gold on the off chance that they can use those to transfer money between themselves for their asset value. I can't see all the gold that they've stored everywhere won't cover the money they've printed everywhere.
Unless, of course, they revalue the price of gold. So if they suddenly turn around and say, rather than gold being $1,200 an ounce,
instead of
it's now $10,000 an ounce or $100,000.
So rather than have the total nonsense of giving people pieces of paper, you give people the notional value of bits of metal that really have no value at all.
Yes, you won't give them the metal because that's now inconceivable, but you would give them paper backed by metal, or even a digital, which we haven't even touched on yet, a digital currency backed by metal, if you like.
How long before we have another destabilising factor coming into this entire discussion?
Such as?
No work.
No work, Greg. What do you mean?
A lot of people haven't even thought about it. we've gone through a period when we have had a very high level of work. Mm-hmm. Women used not to work. Then we had to bring them into the labour force in order that they would work. Mm-hmm. However, we are on the verge of a revolution similar to the Industrial Revolution, where work is replaced in the main by robotics. Then how do you tie that in with your money system, be it fiduciary or other, or fiat or gold or anything else? We're already seeing Finland paying people a salary whether they work or not.
Indeed. Indeed.
Because they know there will come a time, not very far away, when there won't be any work to be done, because robots will be building the robots that do the work.
So, is the answer to that what some of the eugenicists claim, and that is reduce the world population?
No, it won't make a damn difference.
Go on, explain that.
Well, this planet will sustain way more people than we have at present. Everybody's in a complete panic because we're on 8 billion people. Well, when I was born, there were 2 billion.
That's right.
I promise I'm not responsible for any quantifiable percentage rise.
Right.
However, there are now 8 billion.
Yes.
I believe this planet can quite easily sustain 20, 30, 40 billion.
Well, if it's grown 4 times.
What we can't sustain,
yes,
is the change.
Pollution.
No, the change. Mm-hmm. Because the politicians aren't smart enough to be able to manage that change.
Right.
You know, we have been watching the publicity stunts of the new President of America, which are rather embarrassing because he's reduced the position of POTUS to being a publicity stunt now, which I don't think will prove good for America in the long run, and I think it's proving very divisive in the short run.
Well, he's got a lot of followers on this channel because they are, and
he
we
will
have
a lot of followers.
Yeah, and we have to agree with them. They're fed up of professional politicians because one, they do lie, and
if you need brain surgery,
yes,
would you be fed up of professional brain surgeons and rather have a rank amateur idiot?
Yes. Well,
I would submit,
yes,
that if they really do think on those lines, when they stop and think, well, why not rename him Forrest Trump? Or was that Gump?
Gump. Well,
because I don't disagree with their choice.
No.
I don't disagree with their he is the elected president.
Yes.
I don't disagree with any of that. Mm-hmm. But what a sad reflection on the intellectual capacity of the American peoples that they have elected somebody who is quite patently signing documents at a rate that there is no ways he's reading them. I'm sure he hasn't read any of them.
But look what
But he's got a very pretty signature.
Yes.
And furthermore, he hasn't appointed anybody of experience.
Oh no, the cabinet, some members of the cabinet, the ex-generals and so on, do have experience.
I don't see a general as being experienced at anything other than organising people to kill people.
Well, okay.
Do you?
Okay. Well, we could debate that. But if
I was in the army.
Yes, I know. But we could debate that. But if you take, for example, right, you're an unemployed person in Detroit, and you know, if you live in Detroit,
freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
In other words,
why wouldn't you vote for Trump if you're professional politicians?
You are telling me that this is a recipe for destroy everything because my position's not very nice.
So you see his presidency as destroying everything?
No, but that's the logic behind your argument.
Right. I will differ with you there because
that is the logic behind your argument.
Well, no.
I'm fed up with professionals. I want a congenital idiot. I'm not saying he's a congenital idiot.
Well, you're
suggesting
your
that.
Argument. You're suggesting that, aren't you?
I
are.
think we have. Yes, I am.
Yes, you are.
And I believe that I'm suggesting it within the framework of exaggeration to make the point.
It doesn't. If professional politicians have landed the world's economy in a state of bankruptcy, then...
No, they haven't landed it. They've been sliding into it for 2 millennia.
Yes, fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. Then you cannot blame the people for turning around saying, let's have something different.
It is very, very easy for a simpleton to make criticism of that which he doesn't understand. And I am taking the extreme opposite, purely to make the point. Would you want your car fixed by the road sweeper?
Well, his advocates will say he is a billionaire,
Much of which he inherited.
Yes, he did.
And he inherited the totality of the opportunity to become one.
But nevertheless, he could have lost it too, because there are many...
He has frequently.
There are many... Well, yes. Well, he's lost other people's money. Which makes him smart personally.
And what happens if he loses America's money?
Well, that is the argument.
Is it a gamble worth taking?
Indeed.
Well, America's taken it now.
Yes.
And I think we will all see the consequences unless somebody reins him in pretty damn quickly, because he may have this pretty signature he wants to show off that he can write, but he hasn't proved to me yet that he can read.
Indeed. And there are conspiracies about his ability to read as well. But that aside, that aside, there are many who believe that it is actually not a Trump presidency, but a Bannon presidency. And this guy Bannon...
God, it goes from bad to worse.
Well, this guy...
Party in charge.
This guy Bannon is the power behind the throne. Do you believe that?
No.
Then what? That this man came
I don't think Bannon is competent to make a throne, leave alone be the power behind it.
Well, he's
a showman.
He came in. Well, he's a showman behind the scenes to a large extent, because he came in, and to be frank, Trump's campaign was waning, and he and Conway came in, and let's be candid, saved the campaign and caused his victory. So the guy and
if
Conway,
it works out badly, will they be tried for treason?
You'd have
because
to
I don't
explain,
think they thought it through.
You have to explain that question.
I don't think they thought it through in terms other than their own personal gain in the short term.
So you believe that all of these are just opportunists for personal enrichment?
They have not shown me on any single word they have said, or action they have taken, or clever little signature that they put on pieces of paper that they clearly haven't read, that they are anything other than opportunists. And we have now, as president of the strongest free world country, we have a man who is dedicated to making profit.
Greg, it's been a fascinating discussion, or range of discussions really. Thank you for allowing us into your home. And once again, as we have mentioned at the start of this broadcast, there's a lot more to come.
Indeed there is, and I've enjoyed it, and thank you for the opportunity. I've always liked the sound of my own voice.
Greg, thank you once again. We hope you have found this video interesting and informative, and if so, please give it a thumb up and share it on Twitter. Also, kindly visit our website at illuminatisilver.com, and if you haven't already done so, please subscribe as a free member for regular email updates and offers. Our Facebook page, which is updated daily, can be found at facebook.com/illuminatisilver. Disclaimer. Illuminati silver owners come from a background of banking, international wealth management and economics. Having now retired from these worlds, we are not qualified to give investment advice. Therefore, this and other productions must not be deemed to be giving such advice and merely represent the personal views of its owners.